Hi, I'm Brian Schroff from Beyondware. Welcome to part 4 of the video tutorial series for Beyond Typicals 2. In this video, I'll show you some of the remaining advanced roadway sections and some tips on how to use them. I'll give you a tour of the bridge sections available to our pro users. I'll cover some advanced traffic features like adding stop bars to your typical section, and then I'll demonstrate a construction staging example that combines a lot of the things we've learned so far. Let's dive in. Continuing from our previous video, in our road sections, we have these right-of-way visualization sections. Those are here highlighted in bright green. I'll show you an example of what these can look like. These are elements you can bring into your model to show right-of-way lines. Keep in mind, these do add a width by default to your section. So you'll see that when we select these, they're a foot wide. And when we delete them, the total width at the bottom will change. If you want these at a 0-foot width so they don't add width to your section, you can change the spin bar down to 0 feet. These are also really helpful when you are designing to a set right-of-way and you're trying to build some alternative components between them. So I'll go ahead and delete these. We can use our lock outer section to set those right-of-ways to a specific width. So under our section alignment settings, I can say lock outer section, and then I can preset where I want these right-of-way lines to go. So negative will be left of the center line, so I can say negative 50 for the left one and 50 for the right one. So because those are my outermost sections, those will lock into place, and now I am free to continue adding elements or changing widths in my project to fill up that available right-of-way space. We have a few different options for right-of-way lines. We've got our right-of-way 4 shown in the model, plus the shallower options, both solid and with bars. Keep in mind you can also change the color of that right-of-way glow in the texture menu. Next, I'll cover a tip using right-of-way and locking these in our outer sections and using our width bounds to help designers design to a set width. First, I've brought in these tall right-of-way lines and set them to 0 feet, and I can lock those to negative 50 and positive 50. So if I delete a section, you'll see that those are locked in place. What might not be readily apparent for designers, if some of your elements are slightly exceeding that right-of-way, it might be hard to see. So if we turn on our width bounds and set it to 100 feet to match that design right-of-way, you'll see that if we do start exceeding that width, let's just make this grass a little wider, you'll see we get a highlight on those outer sections because that increased width is widening the sections symmetrically. So if I make that grass adjustment back to 4.25 feet, my section is back to 100 feet total in width. Those highlights turn off, and I know as a designer, my typical section is within that 100-foot wide right-of-way. One more tip on right-of-way. Keep in mind you can use those color changes and type changes to show easements. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off width bounds and add in, let's say, a fill slope to either side. I'm going to have to turn off lock outer sections too, because those have now become my outer sections. And I want those exceeding that 100-foot width. So now I've got two 10-foot fill slopes. I could add another right-of-way type out here on the end and maybe change the color to red. Perhaps this is a temporary easement where we need to fill outside the right-of-way to match existing grade. One of the advanced sections new to Beyond Typicals 2 is our earth layer section, so I'll bring one of those in to show you that functionality. By default, it is a 4-foot wide section, but you'll see it contains a piece of earth that is independent of the total width of the section. So you'll see I can adjust this wider or narrower, even down to -1 feet. And what we're left with is a 4-foot wide piece of earth. And this operates similarly to our underground pipe and our custom retaining wall sections, where we can toggle on or off 1, 2, or 3 types of earth within that section. And then we also have a drop-down box to choose different types, materials, or thicknesses of that earth section. So I'll scroll through a few of these. So we've got some earth. We can go up to 4 feet. We've got asphalt, subbase. We've also got some sloped earths. So we have a sloped 8 by 4 foot. So we've got an 8 foot tall by 4 foot wide earth section. And then we can also take the scale and unlink it and adjust those scales as well. So we can bump up the X direction of these elements, bump up the Y direction. See, we can rotate these elements if we want to, similar to our pipes and retaining wall elements. We can adjust a longitudinal offset. We can also move inner positions, which are more fine-tuned changes. So we get an X change or an external if we want to move it a lot further away from where that section is located. So I'll show you how this works. One way to implement this is if you have a retaining wall and you want to show some material, some specific material behind it. So I'll go ahead and bring in a retaining wall custom here and make a few changes. I'm going to turn off the barrier rail up top, and then let's put in a cut slope behind that wall. There we go. So what I want to show then is a engineered fill behind this retaining wall, and I'll show it in a slope direction. So I'm going to use my earth section here. I don't need this to carry any width. If I brought this in, you'll see it'll just kind of push things away. So I'm going to go ahead and set this width down to 0. And you'll see it does compete with some of the other elements here. And if I move that piece around, I'll be able to adjust where it shows up with respect to that section. And then you'll see that it is being hidden. So what I'm going to do is move this longitudinally forward by 0.1. So now I can see that element here, and I'll do the same with my retaining wall just to have that all look appropriate. Move back to my earth layers, and now I'll change this to, let's say, a sloped gravel. Let's do 8x4. There we are. And then I can adjust some of the scales and positions to get this to appear as a gravel fill from the top of the stem to the edge of the footer. One other note, if the longitudinal offset here is sticking out a little too far for your liking, I can show you another way to change that. So we can set that back to 0.5 and then adjust the length of that section. And you'll see that we do have a little finer tune ability to play with some of those units. So we can change the length to just add a fraction of length to that and get that to show up just in front of those elements next to it. So I can do that to the retaining wall elements as well. We'll change that longitudinal offset back to 0.5 and adjust the length to 1.001, and you'll see it just barely sticks out from the other elements around it. One other note on these earth layers, as I alluded to earlier, I'll widen this out so we can see this a little better. There are 3 different layers we can toggle on. So you'll see we've got 1, 2, and 3. So we can show maybe some gravel and some subbase. Let's make the subbase a foot, and then earth we'll do 3 feet. And we can adjust the positions on these in the Y direction to show those over the top of the other. Another use case for earth layers is in a recent tunnel example project I created. What I had done was used our earth layers to create some rather large earth blocks to place above, below, left, and right of these tunnel sections. So when I go select one of these, you'll see I've got some 4-foot deep earth sections, and I can turn these off, and you'll see that I've used some scaling and other transforms and customization to make those really large earth sections all around those tunnel lanes. Another advanced section in Beyond Typicals is our water plane. You'll see when I bring that in and select it, we've got another 0-foot width section here. And similar to our earth layers, we have a water planes dialog tab here where we can change through a few different types of water, some different sizes there as starting points that we can further move left and right, up and down, or scale in the X or Y direction. These water planes go really great in our ditch sections or in a combination of some cut fill slopes. I'll show a cut slope with ballast here and adjust this water plane down to fit inside that ditch alongside the ballast there. Let's pick a smaller section. You can see I've already scaled that up. I can move this to the right and move that down so that we can make sure that water is appearing hidden between those side slopes there. So now we've created a little ditch right there. I'll go ahead and bring in a couple of ditch sections and some cut and fill slopes to show a couple other use cases for our water plane. We also have a section that allows you to place a free pipe or a pipe that's independent of the sections and the underground tool here in that section menu. So basically, if I want to walk through some staging or show an alternative where I would delete a section or change it substantially, I can place a pipe separately from that section so I don't lose it when I make those changes. So what I can do is if I want to show a pipe underneath this common lane, I can place this free pipe somewhere else in the model that can have a position that remains static along this curb and gutter here. Let's go ahead and increase the size of that pipe so we can see it a little bit better. And then we can change the external position. So I can move this in the X direction further away from that section and place it right there under the common lane. And then we can delete this common lane and place in a trench. There we are. And if we make that trench 12 feet wide to match that common lane, or perhaps we could add a couple of shoulders or something on the side of it, that free pipe will stay exactly where it was because we've replaced that 12-foot lane with another object. Lastly, in our road sections, we have the invisible section down here at the bottom. You'll see we can bring that into our model and it creates a section that can add some separation. So you'll see this has a width that we can adjust to as little as -1 if we want to force a couple of objects to overlap by a foot. We can also make that 0 foot and squeeze it right between a couple elements. And we can widen that out as far as 100 feet. A good example of putting this into practice is our guardrail options invisible sections example project. You can see we are using the invisible sections between a few different guardrail options. So this could be a good feature to add in your model if you don't want to use phasing or a layout mode to show multiple options between a few different concepts. Another good option for invisible sections is to create some leader lines where we might have some section overrides. So you'll see here, if I delete the trees right there and add in a second sidewalk, maybe I want to show pedestrians moving in both directions along this sidewalk, but only want this a total of 6 feet wide. I can go ahead and show 2 3-foot sidewalks next to each other, and then we can play with some section label overrides to turn a lot of those lines off. So we'd need to turn off leader lines for both of these elements to get that leader line out of the center of that section. And we can turn a label off at up the top and use the other one with an override and change its position to show a sidewalk of 6 feet. And if we want to see a leader line out here on the right, we can go ahead and bring in an invisible section. You'll see it's got those leader lines toggled on, and we can change that width down to 0 feet to create that outside leader line. Another good use of invisible sections is if you want to add additional repeating assets down your model. So I'll show you, I'll create a brick paved boulevard here that will have a primary repeating asset of a beech tree and a secondary repeating asset of a tree grate. And then I'll use an invisible section to show repeating light poles down the middle of those as well. Now you'll see we have our brick boulevard with repeating assets, a primary asset of a beech tree and a secondary asset of the tree grate. And in order to get some additional repeating assets, all we need to do is drop an invisible section nearby. I'll leave that section width at 5 so I can go ahead and select it. But you'll see we have primary and secondary assets that we can assign to this section as well. So to do that, all I need to do is click this little tree icon in the invisible section. What that'll do is bring up a list of all the 3D assets that we can then toggle on to be placed as a primary or secondary asset. So I'll go ahead and choose this street light and maybe some potted plants. There we go. So now in that section, I can go ahead and add in a street light and a potted plant as assets. I can space those out. Then I can change my width of my section down to 0. Then if I want to move these away from that invisible section between the boulevard and the sidewalk, I can use the external horizontal offset slider and move those left outside that section and move those both over by a few feet. Then I can adjust the spacing and longitudinal offsets so those fit between those trees. One other tip with invisible sections, I'll go back to my retaining wall example here where I added in an earth layer to show some gravel behind this retaining wall. I'll note that this sidewalk is 10 feet and this cut slope is 10 feet, but my retaining wall between them is 0 feet wide. So you'll see if I toggle that off, that stem that's 18 inches wide, that those two elements directly abut each other. So if I needed to be specific and wanted to account for this 18-inch width, I could add in a 1.5 foot wide invisible section next to it. And then I can go over and adjust my retaining wall stem and make sure that those elements are shifted over to fill up that 1.5 foot gap I created. And now I've got an appropriately sized 10 foot wide sidewalk and 10 foot wide cut slope with 1.5 between them to represent the width of that wall. One other use for our invisible sections is using the negative width to help counteract some other widths in your sections that you might not want to show in your total width and keep that total width dynamic. So one of these use cases could be right-of-way. Let's say we want to see right-of-way lines in our model, and we don't want the ones that extend over the top of the typical section elements. So in order to see that, we need to have a width assigned to that, because if we bring that all the way down to 0, that basically becomes invisible. So let's set that back to 1. Now we have a total width down here that has added those two 1 foot right-of-way section widths. So now our total width reads 102 feet. And obviously we can go into our settings and override that dimension by toggling that on and saying 100 feet. But then if we made any other changes to this model, we wouldn't be seeing that change with it because we've overridden that dimension. So as you're designing and you want to keep some visible right-of-way in there, you can use the invisible sections to show a negative width. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that down to -1. Also need to turn off my override dimensions so I can see those change. So you'll see I've already reduced my total width from 102 down to 101 by putting a -1 invisible section on the left, and we'll do that on the right as well. So I've got a 5 foot width, and I can knock that down to -1. So basically that -1 invisible section counteracts the 1 foot width of the right-of-way, and now we have a dynamic total width that shows changes as we make those width changes to our model. Keep in mind that that negative width invisible section would start pulling other elements over the top of the adjacent section. So you'll see here I brought in a fill slope, and because our -1 width invisible section lies just to the right of that right-of-way section, it's pulling that fill slope over a foot to overlap. So there may be some use cases for that, but just keep that in mind here that we would probably want to just use that invisible section on the very end at a negative width so it's not bringing anything else over the top of those right-of-way lines. Our pro users can build bridge typical sections. You can do that by accessing the Bridge tab at the top of our Sections menu, which opens our tray of bridge sections. I'll bring a couple of bridge lanes in and show you the difference there. You'll notice that we've got a concrete base on those bridge lanes, whereas our road common lanes by default have that aggregate and subbase and earth textures below the asphalt surface. We've got a bridge bike lane, which is similar to the bridge lane, where we've got that concrete base, but by default have a green textured pavement, and our cyclists are the moving traffic on that lane. We've also got a bridge lane end, which by default has a concrete surface and has traffic moving down it, but you'll notice the bottom of our concrete base tapers up toward the middle of that section. We've got a few other bridge ends where that bottom of the section tapers. You'll see we've got a bridge end that sits up at sidewalk level. We've also got a bridge end with a 32-inch barrier built into it and a bridge end with a 42-inch barrier built into it. So those barriers aren't assets that are repeating. That's just built into the section. And those will change in width proportionally as you change the total width of the section, similar to our combined curb and gutter sections in the roadway. We've also got some bridge medians. Similarly, we've got a 32-inch and 42-inch option where that median wall changes in height between the two of those. And again, those elements will change in width with the width of the section. We've got a couple of different bridge sidewalks. One we've got down here at the elevation of the pavement, and we've got a raised bridge sidewalk as well, which sits 6 inches higher at the elevation of a curb height. We've got a few different curbs. Bridge curb 1, you'll see, has a rounded face, where our bridge curb 2 has more of a square face. We have a couple different gutters as well. Bridge gutter 1 has a rounded edge that looks really nice next to a raised concrete element. And bridge gutter 2 is just more of a flat concrete surface. We have a bridge fence section here. You'll see that has kind of a tiered concrete wall and has a fence as a primary asset. We've got a few different fences you can choose from. If there's a different fence that you want to show on that, you can always go into your section asset customization and find another fence to turn on. We've got a bridge median flat. You'll see here this has by default an asphalt surface and a barrier 1 as a primary asset. If you wanted to change the texture of your bridge, you can go to our texturing menu and change those textures to perhaps a brushed concrete surface. We have a concrete wear surface for our travel lanes if you want to see shading of those tire tracks through the lanes. And we have the bridge shoulder, which is asphalt by default and similar to our bridge common lane, though it's narrower and has no moving traffic. So I'll go ahead and build you a quick bridge and show you some of our substructure options as well. Okay, so I've built a bridge here. I've got 2 lanes in each direction. See, I got a couple of shoulders and a wall on the inside, some wider shoulders on the outside, some raised sidewalks, in addition to a fence and 2-way bike facility on one side, and then some outer barrier walls as well. To build your substructure elements, you need to have selected one of the sections of your bridge. In your section dialog box, there will be a substructure icon that you can use to toggle on or off substructure elements similar to our underground pipes in our roadway sections. So when I toggle on one of these substructure elements, you'll see that by default, one of our substructure elements will turn on. That is our box girder 1 at the top of this pull down list. And those elements can be transformed. We have an inner position to move those left or right or up or down on that bridge section. And if you needed to move those further left or right, we have our external position sliders as well. If you need to move that closer or further back in your bridge length, you can do that with the longitudinal offset. And if you need to, you could also rotate those. We can also change the scale on all our substructure elements. So in linked, we can scale those proportionally or unlink it to scale just in one direction. So we can do just the X direction or the Y direction. And we also have the length slider, which can change the length of those as well. For our substructure elements, we have a few different regular box girders. We have some steel and concrete I-beam girders. We also have some pier caps and a few different kinds of piers. We also have some wide box girders. And we also have an arch bridge and a cable bridge. And these two options work best with a bridge section that is longer, or you could scale these down to fit. But generally these were put in for about a 400 to 500 foot section. So I'll go ahead and split the difference there. Let's go 450, and I'll show you what those can look like when we adjust to the transforms of those. So I've got the cable bridge selected now. Let's bring that X scale back to 1, and you'll see since I put it under this common lane, that's what it's being centered under. We can adjust that position by moving the X direction to get it closer to the middle of the roadway. We can adjust the Y position as well if we need to lift that higher to get just to the bottom of the deck, or maybe to line up with some of our other substructure elements. Then we can adjust the scale, so we can go ahead and raise that scale so that those cables are outside our bridge. We also have the option of changing the Y and X separately. Our arch bridge operates similarly, so we can make those same transforms. And again, we've kind of already lined that cable bridge into place, so this generally looks pretty good, but we can adjust the length or scaling of that as well. So basically each individual section of your bridge can have up to 3 different substructure elements. So for as many sections as you've built into your bridge, you can have that many times 3 substructures. So really, there's plenty of space for all of the substructures you'll need. It's just a matter of putting them in the right place on your bridge so that those substructure elements are easy for you to find and go back and modify should you need to make changes in the future. So I'll speed this up and show you an example of building some substructure elements. I'll use some girders and piers and pier caps and show you an example of what that can look like. To fill out your bridge section, you could add in some abutments as placed assets. So down in our asset menu, you can search for abutment. We currently have a couple of different versions. These you can bring into your section as a placed asset. I'll go ahead and place that on the middle section there. And then I can use a combination of our asset transformation tools and the asset placement tab in our section info to get that abutment rotated correctly, moved into place, and scaled to fit the section. We have some advanced traffic settings new to Beyond Typicals 2, particularly in version 2.1. We are able to add in a stop bar to our section. What that will do is show traffic temporarily coming to a stop and then accelerating through your section. In our traffic menu, in our section dialog box, we have a toggle to use a stop bar. We also can turn a visualizer for that stop bar on to see where it is in the section. And we can also turn a visualizer for a stop sign on to show when those cars would be coming to a stop and when they would be going. For instance, when the stop sign is showing with that visualizer, the traffic would be coming to a stop, and when it's gone, it's like a green light and the cars can continue on. So we have a spin bar to change the stop bar location. So you can see we can move that forward or back within our segment. We also have a stop bar timing group. So there are 4 different groups that we can adjust that timing to in a set of stages that I'll show you later in our global settings. There are also some of these advanced settings. We're still working through these and may update these in future patches, but for now you can play with these if you want to see traffic behaving differently, like coming to a stop slower or faster, or leaving more space between the vehicle and either the stop bar or vehicles in front of it. But for now, I think the best way to control your traffic is just playing with some of the settings. It's dependent on the speed of traffic. It's dependent on the volume. It's also dependent on your frame rate. Traffic is spawning when you have a volume greater than 1. It's spawning based on the frames that your Beyond Typicals application is running. That's why down here in our global traffic settings, we've got this fixed frame rate so that the traffic will all be predictable and come in at a set rate that isn't dependent on the performance of your computer. But getting back to those advanced traffic settings, in our global settings, you'll see under traffic, we've got intersection timings right here. This is where we can change the length of time for our stages. So you'll see we have 4 different stages we can add time to or subtract time from. So these spin bars are in seconds. They can go up to 100 or down to 0 if you want to deactivate that stage. We can use these timers, or we can toggle that off. If you just want a permanent stop sign, you can go ahead and just leave that off. You can manually advance the intersection stage, so I can override this 5-second interval and just click this button. That can help get that traffic going and stopping when you want it to. So then let's play around with this. So we've got a bus stop that we want buses to come to a stop to temporarily. These stage seconds, 5 seconds for each stage, probably not necessary for something this simple. What I'm going to do is deactivate stage 3 and 4 so that I just get a single red light and a single green light. And since I've got stop bar timing group 2, that means when stage 2 is active, they're getting that green light. And when every other stage is active, they would get the stop sign. So right now it seems like stop bar timing group 2 seems to be working. I think what I want is a longer red light. So I'm going to go ahead and boost the stage 1 to 15 seconds, and maybe we can change stage 2 down to 2 seconds. All we need, since we just got one bus coming through, we just need a brief window for that bus to go through. If that's any longer, we might start seeing multiple buses blow through this bus stop, and I want to see all of them go down. So just 2 seconds, and then that next bus will come to a stop and wait for about 10 to 15 seconds, depending on when it gets there. So this just happened as I was tinkering around with some traffic settings. This bus came to a very jerky stop. That can happen in Beyond Typicals. We are continuing to try to improve traffic and make it as realistic as possible, but since it's dependent on so many things like the speeds and volumes and stopgap multipliers and timings and stop bar locations and frame rates, for now we just recommend you tinker around with settings. It might take some trial and error to get traffic behaving the way you want it to. We also have a global override setting. So you'll see when the visualizer is turned on, we're able to see where that stop bar is and when the vehicle will stop. If we turn those visualizers off, we won't see them in the model. A quick override, if you had multiple stop signs and stop bars in your model, is to turn this global setting for override show stop signs on, override show stop bars on. That'll help you as you work through your model and maybe adjust some of those other settings. You'll see if I use stop bars without a visualizer on these lanes that I'm also getting that stop bar turned on. So maybe I've done that through my whole model and it's ready to cut a video. I can go ahead and just toggle that override off everywhere, and it will be quickly ready to show a realistic screen cap or video of your stopping action. I'll go ahead and show you a couple other examples. Here I've got a project with a mid-block crosswalk and some bump outs and a pedestrian refuge island. Here could be a good case to show stopping traffic. So first I will go ahead and toggle on my overrides so I can see when I place those. And let's add a stop bar to this lane and this lane as well. And you'll see I've got some stop bars. I can turn the visualizer off here since I've got my global setting on. And I'm going to make a couple of tweaks to my stop bars so these stop a little bit closer to that crosswalk. There we go. And then again, I've got some multiple stages set here. Let's go to my intersection timings. It seems like this is set back to 5 seconds for all of my stages. So I'm going to go ahead and change stage 3 to 0 and stage 4 to 0, as I just want a red light, green light phase. And let's give a red light. Again, I want a pretty quick green light. Let's make that our stage 2 this time. And I want a longer red light, so let's make that 10 seconds. And then I want to go ahead and set both of these lanes to stage 2 so they get that short green light. So stop bar timing group 2 for this lane and 2 for this lane. And now we should be seeing that traffic come to a stop. I'm going to bump up that volume so we get a few more cars coming through the model here. And then we can toggle off the overrides to show those stop signs and stop bars so we can just see that traffic behaving without those visualizers active. You'll see my outbound traffic doesn't seem to fully come to a complete stop. So what I can do is adjust the volume upwards and get some more vehicles to come through there. I could also advance the traffic staging. So if I click this button, I can get those vehicles to offset from that repeating pattern and start to see the vehicles come in at a different point in that cycle and then start coming to a complete stop. Let's load another example. I've got a light rail project here to show you that you can also add stop bars to your rail sections. So let's go ahead and add those here. Once again, I want to turn on overrides, and I'm going to just want 2 stages. So I'm going to take stage 3 down to 0 and stage 4 to 0. And let's again show a really long stage 1 since we've got boarding and alighting for trains, and a really short stage 2 for a green light. So I'm going to want both of these set to a timing group of 2. So let's toggle on use stop bar. We've got timing group 2 set there already. And then for this one, I will use the stop bar. You'll see it's down at the end of the platform. And then we can use stop bar timing group 2 here as well. So we've got a nice long stage 1 for those trains to come to a complete stop where passengers could get on and off. And then a quick stage 2 for a green light to get those single trains to accelerate and move out of the section. I'll wrap up by saying that our stop bars don't only apply to common lanes or bus lanes or light rail. You can put them on any section with moving traffic. So if you find a need for it, you can put them in sidewalks or bike lanes or any of those other sections with moving traffic. Let's combine a lot of the things we've learned and create a staging plan for this roadway improvement. I'll be using some pro features like phasing and advanced texturing here, but our light users could still create something similar and save these models into individual BTIP files. So here's our existing condition. It's a 70-foot wide section. It's got two 12-foot wide lanes in each direction. And here's our final improvement. It's a road diet with one lane in each direction and a new two-way left turn lane down the middle. Our lanes are narrowed to 10 feet, and we've got some curb-protected bike lanes on the outside. I'm going to show this being built with concrete pavement. And actually, while I'm at it, let's go ahead and change that to a green surface. So for our pro users and advanced texturing, we can go ahead and change the surface of that texture. And let's make that a little bit darker. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy this hex value and apply the same thing over here. Okay, so to get from existing conditions to our final improvement, I'll start adding in some phasing and show the removal of pavement. So for our bike lanes, we're going to remove both of these asphalt layers that I put into our existing conditions. And we're also going to show a mill and overlay of that existing asphalt pavement in the middle to show a fresher, dark asphalt on the final improvement. So to begin, I want to duplicate my existing conditions phase and go ahead and name this Stage 1. And you'll see I moved it in between existing and final. Then what I'm going to want to do is shut this road down to one lane in each direction. So we'll go ahead and flip this traffic here, and then I'll turn traffic off for these two lanes. And then since we're in a construction zone, let's narrow those lanes up to 10 feet. And then I'll need to bring in something else to account for that 4-foot loss. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in a shoulder and put it right here in the middle. And that's where we'll add in our construction barrels. First, I'm going to change my textures to match the other pavement layers there. You saw with that default shoulder that third layer was subbase. I'm using that to show another layer of asphalt so that we can show that mill and overlay in later stages. Okay, so now I want to change some of the striping. So we'll get rid of these stripes over here. We'll make this the double yellow. And then I'll want to add in a stripe where I'm going to put those barrels. And now for my primary asset for this shoulder, I can just change that to construction barrel. And let's pull those a little closer together. Now for this side in Stage 1, since we've closed traffic, we can show that pavement getting removed. So for our inner common lane, I can show that top asphalt layer as transparent and show this outer one as both of those asphalt layers transparent, because we're going to need to remove all of it in order to put in our concrete bikeway and this curb and gutter separator. You'll notice that the widths don't match up. So in this section, I'm going to want to adjust some widths so that I can get this to match. So I've got a 6-foot bikeway, a 2-foot wide curb type 5, and a 1-foot wide gutter. So these add up to 9 feet. And I'm going to go ahead and change this to 9 to show that section of pavement removal. And we'll go ahead and widen this common lane out to 15 to match. There we go. So that can be our Stage 1. I think while we're here, we can use some of our area highlights to show the differences there. So let's show a couple of different highlights, maybe for, let's also rename this section. So we'll go with mill surface. And then over here, we can say pavement removal. And then we can go ahead and change the highlighting. Let's pick something like woven. Maybe we'll change the colors on these too. So there is our Stage 1. To do stage 2, what we're going to do is show this all getting built. So we're going to, in stage 2, build our curb separator and our bikeway. And then we're also going to show all of the traffic surface getting milled and the traffic moving into the center of the road. Let's go ahead and get started on that. So I will use this stage and duplicate it once again, move it up in the priority list and call it stage 2. Can turn off those highlights. And then I'm going to want to build in my bike lane, my curb type 5. That is 2 feet. And the gutter. I'm going to change the texture on this bikeway to match. Now, the rest of the pavement we want to show is milled. There's a few things to address here. First, we can get rid of those barrels and bring that shoulder width back later. But if we start changing the top layer of the asphalt to transparent, you're going to see we're going to lose those stripes. That's because by default, with a transparent surface, those stripes, if they continued to appear, would be hovering. So it's just a beyond typical setting to turn those off. There is one workaround we can do. We can use our advanced texturing to change the asphalt layers so that we don't have 2 asphalt layers, but 1. And then we can raise all the other sections up so that our curbs, our sidewalk, and our grass medians are all a little bit higher than that thinner asphalt surface, giving the appearance that that doubly thick asphalt pavement from our existing conditions has been milled off across the full width. So I'll go ahead and do that and just see if you can follow along. So we're going to do an asphalt nowhere on top. And since all of this asphalt pavement is the same condition where we're going to have the milled surface, now we don't need that second asphalt layer below it. So let's just call that subbase. So let's go ahead and grab all of those other elements that want to raise up. And let's raise that up 0.5. It actually looks like our grass was already at 0.5, so we're going to want to change those to a height of 1. Then I think what we're going to want to do is show that in all of our stages. This is probably a little bit more nitpicky than it needs to be, but if we're toggling through phasing and showing this to people, we don't want to see that half-foot height differential in just one of those phases. So I'm going to go ahead and raise all of those elements up, and then I'll raise these grasses up to 1. So that's our existing conditions. I'll do that in our stage 1 and final improvements as well. There we go. So we've raised up all those other elements. You'll see here in this stage with the mill and overlay, we've got this minor differential in subgrade. That's a trade-off I'm willing to make to have the rest of these phases look consistent. We've got traffic driving on these lanes. We've got our striping back, and now we can start adjusting those widths to show the construction of the bikeway over here. So what I'm going to want to do is let's take this mill surface section and move it over. We're at 66 feet. We need to be at 70 total. I know I've got 6, 7, 8, 9 feet for the bikeway over here. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this mill surface section. Call that 9. We'll call that pavement removal. Then we can lower this one down to 6. And that can be our mill surface. And we have to bring that shoulder back in to match the other section with the barrels. And let's change the top layer of this pavement removal section back to transparent. There we go. So now we've got our 2 lanes of traffic pushed over against the new bikeway here. And then we've got our pavement removal, our mill surface across the whole lane. And we can also add in some arrows for moving traffic. Let's do that on stage 1 as well. Then we can show this mill surface highlight over here on stage 2 as well. And that woven pattern for pavement removal. There we go. Now we've got our stage 2 done. If those arrows and highlights ever get too noisy for your diagram, you simply can turn them off when you need to. Let's go ahead and duplicate stage 2 to make stage 3 right before our final improvement. And in stage 3, we'll show that left side bike lane constructed. We'll show traffic pretty much moving where it should be in the final improvement with some temporary striping and that milled surface still there. So to start, let's go ahead and delete this pavement removal section and we'll add in our bikeway. I can just duplicate these elements and move them over. Flip them as appropriate. Then instead of a mill surface and a shoulder, we've got our two 10-foot common lanes that'll match the final condition. And then all we need is another common lane in the middle there without traffic. And then I see this a lot during staging and maintenance of traffic where those stripes may not be fully striped down the road. So let's show more of a temporary stripe. We'll put some spacing on those double yellows just to represent some interim striping, possibly tape in the field. There we go. I'm going to make a few cosmetic improvements here. For starters, since all of my traffic in construction zones should be moving a lot slower, I'm going to bump these speeds down in my staging phases to 20 miles an hour. And then I think what I'd like to do is add in some custom labeling to indicate maybe above the section as to what is happening in each of these stages. So for starters, I'll add in a custom label to existing conditions just to describe that. And then I'll add in some custom labeling for stage 1, 2, 3, and the final improvements over here on the left. So I'll speed this video up and you can see me add those. There we go. Now we've got a floating label here that describes what's happening in each of our phases. So we have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and our final improvement labels in addition to that existing condition label. And what I can do now is also show another pro user feature and have our auto phasing turned on. So if we toggle this on in our settings, you'll see we get this auto phase interval seconds. I can add a length of time. So let's add 10 seconds and you'll see this will step by step walk through the phases over this automated amount of time. So if we want, we could cut a video that basically includes all the information necessary in a single render that walks through all 5 of our phases and shows with our custom labeling what's happening in each of those stages, and then describes the final improvement as well. That will do it for part 4 of our Beyond Typicals video tutorial series, touring the rest of our road and bridge sections, showing our advanced traffic features, and adding some tips on how to incorporate those into your projects. In our next video, I'll give a more in-depth look on 3D assets, including how to bring them into your typical section to enhance the realism of your visualizations. Thanks for watching.